guys. While you are starting your weekend, I am going to teach you about radians and degrees. Hi. So far when we've talked about angles in your life, everything has been degrees. 30 degrees, 60 degrees, everything and we do that because we've been talking about triangles and it kind of makes sense. Well, there's another way to measure an angle, and it's called a radian. So every degree measurement has a radian measurement that goes with it. And the idea is, if you think about a circle from geometry, we're going to start measuring our angles as starting on the x-axis and moving counterclockwise from there around and around in a circle. So if I think about a 30-degree angle, let's say I put it there, I'd be talking about the idea that an angle is 30 degrees from the x-axis up to the angle. But that's kind of a weird thing because that 30 degrees doesn't really give me much understanding in terms of actual size. Like an angle can be this small or this small and it's still 30 degrees, but it's just kind of a weird measurement. So we stop using degrees and we start measuring things in what's called radians. And where it comes from is a circle. If I have a circle, and let's just say the radius of the circle is 1. So this is 1, this is 1. The radius, no matter what direction from the center, is 1. If you think about the circumference of a circle, the circumference of a circle, you can find with the formula 2 times pi times the radius. So if the radius of my circle is 1, the circumference is 2 times pi times 1, which is just 2 pi. So what we're going to say now, instead of all the way around the circle being 360 degrees, we're going to think about all the way around the circle being 2 pi radians. And they're the same thing. 360 degrees and 2 pi radians are the same thing. It's just a different way to talk about it. So what we're going to end up doing is looking at this circle and trying to take a lot of our degree measurements and turn them into a radian measurement instead. So for example, we know that halfway around the circle, so if you go halfway around or if you do just a half turn, it's 180 degrees. Well, I want to know how many degrees, if that's 180 degrees, how many radians is that? So what does that measure in terms of pi and in terms of radians? Well, if all the way around the circle was 2 pi radians, because that was the circumference, halfway around the circle is half of that much. So it's pi radians. And I can do that for every place on the circle. So let's just do the big ones. If this from here to here is 90 degrees, how many radians? Well, if this much is pi radians, from here to here is only half of that. So it's pi divided by 2 radians, or 1/2 pi radians. Same thing down here, how many degrees? Well, this is 90, and this is 180, and this is 270 degrees, which is the same thing then as if this is 1/2 pi, and this is pi, this is going to be 1.5 pi, and this is 2. So this is the same as, we call it 3/2 pi radians. Now there's going to be other places on the circle too. There's not just these big spots at 0 degrees or 360 degrees, 90, 180, and 270. We also have halfway here. Halfway between the 0 spot and the 90 spot is 45 degrees. Any guesses how many radians that would be? Well, it's going to be pi over 4 radians. In the second lesson, we're going to go through the really important spots. But what we're going to continue today for this lesson is how do we take degrees and change them into radians when it's not so easy to figure out. So these places have been pretty easy. But what if I asked you, let's even say for 30 degrees, how many radians? Well, you're going to do this the same way that you did stuff in chemistry, if you guys have taken chemistry before. So see how these, I'm going to pick these two out for a second. See how pi radians and 180 degrees are the same thing? Well, I'm going to use that. And I'm going to use that if I take pi radians and make a fraction out of that in 180 degrees, that technically equals 1. Because it's the same exact measurement. Pi radians and 180 degrees are the same thing. So if I make a fraction out of it, it equals 1. So what I'm going to do is, if I want to know how to change 30 degrees into radians, I'm going to multiply it by 1. But instead of using 1, I'm going to multiply it by pi radians over 180 degrees. And the reason for that is because the degrees on top and the degrees on the bottom cancel. It's kind of like in chemistry when you wanted to convert like feet per second to meters per second, and you would use your conversion factor between feet and meters, so like feet would cancel and you'd be replaced with meters. I'm going to do this in such a way that my degrees cancel, and what I have then is 30 pi over 180 radians. I use RAD for radians. And you can reduce that. If I have two numbers that will reduce, I'll reduce it. This is going to end up being 1/6. 30 over 180 reduces to 1/6. So I'm going to write it as 1 pi over 6 radians. So how many radians is 30 degrees? Pi over 6. Okay, let's do another one. Let's say I want to rewrite 42 degrees as a radian measurement instead. So if I want to write 42 degrees, I have to multiply this by pi radians over 180 degrees. The degrees will cancel, and I'll have left 42 pi over 180 radians. I'll reduce it if I can, so this does reduce. It's going to be, I don't know, 6 goes into it 7, and 6 goes into that 30 times. So 7 pi over 30 radians. Now, we also have to go the other way. What if instead I said how many degrees are, let's say, 3 pi radians. So if I want to go back the other way, I'm going to still take 3 pi. I'm going to take whatever I'm given, 3 pi radians, and I'm going to multiply it by 1. But the big thing you need to know is instead of multiplying it by the one I did before, I'm going to flip this. And I'm going to put 180 degrees on top and pi radians on the bottom, so that the radians and the radians part will cancel, and I'll be left with degrees. So I'll go through, I'll do 3 times pi times 180 on the top. So 3 times pi times 180 on the top. Pi on the bottom, this is degrees. The pi's cancel, and I multiply this out, and I'm going to get 540 degrees. Got it? I'll do one more. Okay, it doesn't always come out so nicely. So let's say I have 3 pi over 4 radians. And I want to know how many degrees is that. I'm going to multiply by 1. But specifically, I'm going to put radians in the bottom and degrees on the top. So the radians and the radians will cancel. And I just multiply across, so I'll have 3 times pi times 180 on the top. And I'll have 4 times pi on the bottom, and this is degrees. So then I'm going to cancel my pi's out and reduce it if I can. So 3 times 180, that was 540 over 4 degrees. And go ahead and divide this. So we're going to get 1, 3, 5, 135 degrees. So that is what you need to know for the first worksheet. I'll bring you the second one in a couple minutes.